A man saves a puppy from a raging storm, believing he's found a loyal companion, but months later, he's shocked to discover it's not a dog at all. What begins as a simple rescue turns into a fight for truth, survival, and justice. The animal he loves carries a hidden secret that powerful men will do anything to keep buried. One small act of kindness pulls him into a dangerous world of lies, fire, and betrayal, where the cost of doing the right thing may be everything he has. What was this creature hiding all along? And how far will someone go to make sure the truth never gets out? I'd love to know. Where are you watching from? Type it down below, and while you're here, subscribe so you'll always catch the next story. The spring storm came without warning, hammering the tin roof of Harlan Pike's workshop with angry fists of rain. Thunder rolled across the darkening sky, and lightning split the heavy clouds, illuminating the scattered tools and half-finished repairs that filled his workspace. It was the kind of storm that made even the sturdiest trees bow and bend, their branches whipping in the fierce wind. Harlan stood at his workshop door, watching sheets of water cascade down the rutted driveway. The evening had turned mean, washing away the warmth of the April afternoon. His weathered hands, rough from years of working with engines and machinery, gripped the doorframe as another crack of thunder shook the air. That's when he heard it. A sound so faint it almost disappeared beneath the storm's fury. A thin, desperate cry that made him cock his head and strain to listen. There it was again, coming from the direction of the old culvert that ran beneath the access road. "Lord Almighty," he muttered, grabbing his rain jacket from its hook. The coat had seen better days, its waterproofing worn thin in places, but it was better than nothing. He didn't stop to think about what he was doing. Something in that cry wouldn't let him stay put. The rain struck his face like tiny needles as he slogged through the mud. Water had already turned the drainage ditch into a rushing stream, and the culvert was working overtime to handle the flow. Harlan's boots sank deep with every step, the soil giving way beneath his weight. Another cry, weaker this time, drew him to the culvert's mouth. He dropped to his knees, ignoring the cold mud soaking through his jeans, and pulled out his flashlight. The beam cut through the gloom, reflecting off the churning water and the corrugated metal sides of the pipe. There. Something small and dark was pressed against the inside wall of the culvert, barely keeping its head above the rising water. Without hesitation, Harlan lay flat on his stomach and reached into the pipe. The metal edge was sharp, damaged from years of flood debris, and he felt it slice into his palm as he stretched further in. "Come on," he urged, fingers straining. "Come on, little fella." His hand found wet fur, and he got a grip on what felt like a scruff of neck. As he pulled, the creature didn't resist. It was too exhausted to fight. The jagged metal caught his other hand as he worked to free the animal, adding more cuts to his collection, but Harlan barely noticed the pain. Finally, he dragged the small body clear of the culvert. It was a puppy, or so he thought at first glance, soaked to the skin, shivering violently, with reddish-grey fur plastered to its lean frame. But something about it gave him pause. The amber eyes that met his were too knowing, too wild, and its mouth was set in an unnatural stillness that no regular dog would maintain. "You're a sorry sight," Harlan said softly, already shrugging out of his flannel shirt. The rain had soaked through his jacket anyway, and the animal needed the warm layer more than he did. He wrapped the trembling creature carefully, noting how it didn't make a sound. No whimper, no bark, nothing but those intense amber eyes watching his every move. The walk back to his house seemed longer with his precious burden. The storm showed no signs of letting up, but Harlan's focus had narrowed to the small life in his arms. It had been 2 years since Martha passed, 2 years of rattling around his property alone, fixing other people's broken machines because he couldn't fix what was broken in himself. Now, holding this mysterious foundling, he felt something shift inside his chest, a responsibility he hadn't asked for but couldn't deny. Inside, the wood stove filled the living room with steady heat. Harlan made a bed of old towels near the stove's warmth, laying the bundled animal down with gentle hands. "Let's get you dried off proper," he murmured, using a clean towel to carefully pat the wet fur. The creature allowed the attention without protest, those amber eyes never leaving Harlan's face. As he worked, Harlan could feel the rapid heartbeat beginning to slow, the violent shivering gradually easing. The reddish-grey fur began to fluff up as it dried, revealing a coat unlike any dog breed he knew. "Copper," he said suddenly, surprising himself. "That's what I'll call you, Copper." The name felt right, matching the burnished tones in the animal's unusual coat. His own hands were starting to sting, and Harlan finally looked at the damage from the culvert. Several deep cuts crossed his palms, mixed with shallow scratches and embedded dirt. He should clean them, he knew, but he couldn't bring himself to leave his new charge just yet. Instead, he settled into his old armchair, ignoring the way his wet clothes clung uncomfortably to his skin. Rain drummed steadily on the roof, a sound that had often emphasized his solitude in the years since Martha died. But tonight was different. Tonight, the rain seemed to seal him and Copper in their own small world, creating a moment of connection he hadn't expected and wasn't sure he was ready for. Copper's eyes were growing heavy, the warmth and safety finally overwhelming the animal's fear. Harlan watched as the peculiar foundling drifted off to sleep, its chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm that somehow matched the tapping of rain on tin. What am I getting myself into? Harlan wondered aloud, but he already knew it was too late for such questions. Something had awakened in him when he'd heard that cry in the storm. Something that had been dormant since he'd lost Martha. It was a flicker of purpose, of responsibility, quiet, but undeniable. The storm raged on outside, but inside Harlan's home, a small miracle was taking place. In saving this mysterious creature, he had unknowingly taken the first step towards saving himself from the isolation that had become his way of life. As he finally rose to tend to his injured hands, Harlan knew that tomorrow would bring questions and challenges. But for now, the sound of rain and the sight of Copper sleeping peacefully by his wood stove were enough. The cuts on his hands would heal, but the impact of this night, this simple act of rescue, would leave a far more lasting mark. Tomorrow would come soon enough with its complications, but tonight was for beginnings, however small and unexpected they might be. The days melted into weeks, and Harlan found himself studying Copper with growing curiosity. The peculiarities of his rescued companion became more apparent with each passing day. Unlike other dogs that filled the countryside with their constant barking, Copper maintained an eerie silence. Not once had Harlan heard so much as a yip from the creature, even when excited or startled. During their daily walks, Copper's behavior continued to puzzle him. The animal would duck his head whenever Harlan tried to make eye contact, a gesture that seemed more calculated than submissive. It reminded Harlan of wild things, of creatures that lived by instinct rather than training. Most striking was Copper's extraordinary ability to navigate the wilderness surrounding Harlan's property. Through the longleaf pines and dense scrub, the animal moved with purpose, creating invisible pathways that he would retrace perfectly days later. Harlan watched in amazement as Copper memorized every trail, every shortcut, every hidden passage through the underbrush, with an accuracy that seemed almost supernatural. "You sure ain't like any dog I've ever known," Harlan would sometimes mutter, watching Copper pause at specific landmarks, his nose working the air with deliberate precision. Harlan's own routines shifted to accommodate his unusual companion. He started rising before dawn, when the world was still quiet and few people were about. Their walks became longer, more purposeful expeditions into the surrounding wilderness. The early morning light would filter through the pine needles as they made their way through the forest, Copper leading with confident steps while Harlan followed, learning to trust his companion's judgment. The matter of food had required some adjustment too. Copper turned his nose up at conventional dog food, refusing to touch the kibble Harlan initially offered. After several failed attempts, Harlan resigned himself to providing raw meat, watching as Copper devoured it with calculated efficiency that seemed more predator than pet. They avoided other dogs and their owners, maintaining a careful distance that suited them both. Harlan had always preferred solitude, and Copper showed no interest in socializing with his supposed kind. When they encountered others on their walks, Copper would press close to Harlan's side, amber eyes watchful, body tense until the strangers passed. The incident at the school bus stop changed everything. It happened on a crisp morning in early spring, when the air still held winter's bite. Harlan and Copper were returning from their dawn walk, taking the long way home past where local kids gathered to catch the bus to school. The morning quiet was shattered by frightened screams. A coyote, lean and desperate from the harsh winter, had ventured too close to civilization. It stood at the edge of the tree line, eyeing the cluster of children with predatory intent. Before Harlan could fully process the situation, Copper was moving. There was nothing domestic in the way Copper confronted the coyote. He didn't bark or growl. He simply fixed those intense amber eyes on the intruder and advanced with deadly purpose. The coyote, reading something in Copper's stance that Harlan couldn't quite see, backed away. For a moment, the two wild things locked gazes, and something unspoken passed between them. Then the coyote turned tail and fled, disappearing into the underbrush as silently as it had appeared. The children's parents, arriving moments later in response to the commotion, heard the story from their wide-eyed kids. Word spread quickly through their small community. Harlan Pike's strange, silent dog had protected the children. The tale grew with each telling, and suddenly Harlan found himself and Copper the subject of local attention. "That's him! The man with the strange dog!" he would hear people whisper when he went into town for supplies. Some offered thanks for Copper's protection of the children. Others asked questions about his unusual pet, questions Harlan couldn't or wouldn't answer. The attention made Harlan uncomfortable. He had spent years cultivating his solitude, finding peace in the quiet routine of his repair work and solitary life. Now, people wanted to talk, to connect, to understand the mystery of his silent guardian. Some suggested he should keep Copper chained up, arguing that no dog should have such freedom to roam. Others hinted that there was something not quite right about an animal that never barked, that moved with such calculated precision. But Harlan refused to confine Copper or hide him away. "He came to me free," Harlan told a particularly insistent neighbor, "and that's how he'll stay." Their daily routine continued, though now marked by occasional interruptions, people wanting to see the heroic dog, children waving from a safe distance, curious onlookers studying Copper's unusual appearance and behavior. Harlan found himself drawn, reluctantly but inevitably, into wider circles of interaction. He began to notice things he had overlooked in his years of self-imposed isolation. The way Mrs. Henderson from the general store would save the best cuts of meat for Copper. How the school children would call out greetings during their morning walks. The respectful nods from other early morning walkers who had learned to give Copper the space he needed. Harlan's world, which had contracted to the size of his workshop after Martha's death, began to expand again. It happened slowly, almost imperceptibly, like the gradual lengthening of spring days. Each interaction, each small connection, added another thread to the web of community he had once abandoned. Through it all, Copper remained constant, silent, watchful, mysteriously wild yet unshakably loyal. Their bond deepened with each passing day, built on mutual understanding and respect. Harlan no longer questioned the peculiarities of his companion. He had come to accept them as part of who and what Copper was, even if he didn't fully understand what that might be. The attention they received remained a source of discomfort for Harlan, but he weathered it for Copper's sake. His life, once deliberately kept small and manageable, was changing. Each day brought new challenges, new interactions, new opportunities to step beyond the boundaries he had set for himself. The peaceful rhythm that Harlan and Copper had established was shattered one Wednesday morning by a sharp knock at the door. Opening it, Harlan found two county officials standing on his worn welcome mat, their expressions a mix of official concern and local familiarity. "Morning, Mr. Pike," said the taller one, who Harlan recognized as Bill Matthews from the county office. "We need to discuss your dog's vaccination records." Harlan's stomach tightened. He'd known this day might come, but had hoped to avoid it. "What brings this on?" "That incident at the bus stop got reported up the chain," Bill explained, shuffling his feet uncomfortably. "Protocol requires us to verify all dogs have their shots, especially ones involved in public incidents." Behind Harlan, Copper watched from his spot near the wood stove, amber eyes alert but body perfectly still. The officials kept glancing past Harlan's shoulder at the unusual animal, their professional demeanor tinged with curiosity. "I found him during the storm," Harlan said carefully. "Haven't had the chance to get him to a vet yet." The second official, a younger woman Harlan didn't recognize, spoke up. "Sir, you'll need to provide proof of rabies vaccination within 72 hours, or we'll have to impound the animal. It's county law." Before Harlan could respond, a sleek black SUV pulled into his gravel driveway, its tires crunching importantly on the stone. A well-dressed man stepped out, his expensive boots clicking against the ground as he approached. Everything about him spoke of money and influence, from his carefully styled hair to his confident stride. "Gentlemen, ladies," the newcomer called out with practiced charm, "I believe I can help clear this situation up." He extended a manicured hand toward the officials. "Mort Caro, Caro's Premium Kennels. That animal in there, he's one of mine." Harlan felt his chest tighten. "What are you talking about?" Caro's smile never wavered as he pulled a folder from his leather briefcase. "One of my prized timber mix studs went missing during that big storm a few weeks back. When I heard about the incident at the bus stop, well..." He spread his hands in a gesture of false modesty. The description matched perfectly. The female official accepted the folder, examining the papers inside. "These appear to be in order. Registration, vaccination records, breeding documentation." "That's impossible," Harlan interrupted. "I found him in a culvert, half drowned." "Yes, poor fellow must have gotten spooked by the storm and run off," Caro said smoothly. "These timber mixes are valuable animals, Mr. Pike. This one's worth several $1,000s. I appreciate you taking him in, but he needs to come home now." Harlan's hands clenched at his sides. Something about Caro's story felt wrong, like a gear that wouldn't quite catch. He thought about Copper's wild grace, his silent ways, the look in his eyes that spoke of something far removed from kennel breeding. "He's not yours," Harlan said firmly, stepping to block the doorway more fully. Caro's pleasant expression flickered for just a moment, revealing something harder underneath. "The paperwork says otherwise, friend. Now, we can do this the easy way." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a checkbook. "I'm willing to compensate you for your trouble, of course." "He's not for sale," Harlan growled. "And he's not yours." The county officials shifted uncomfortably, caught between Caro's documentation and Harlan's obvious conviction. Bill Matthews cleared his throat. "Mr. Pike, if Mr. Caro has legal ownership..." "Legal ownership of what?" Harlan demanded. "A timber mix that never barks? That moves like no dog I've ever seen. Something's not right here." Caro's facade cracked further, his smile turning razor thin. "Careful now, Mr. Pike. You're coming awful close to questioning my integrity. I've got judges who'll vouch for my breeding program. What do you have? A story about finding a stray?" The tension on the porch grew thick enough to cut. Behind Harlan, Copper had risen silently to his feet, those amber eyes fixed on Caro with unnerving intensity. Something in that gaze seemed to unsettle the kennel owner, though he tried to hide it. "The law will settle this," Caro said finally, his tone carrying a clear threat beneath its professional veneer. "I'll be back with a court order. Maybe then you'll be more reasonable about returning my property." He turned and walked back to his SUV, his boots no longer clicking quite so confidently. The county officials lingered awkwardly, clearly torn about their duty. 72 hours, Mr. Pike," the female official reminded him gently. "Either proper vaccination records or..." She left the consequence unspoken. After they left, Harlan stood in the doorway for a long time, watching their vehicles disappear down his long driveway. His mind raced with implications. He'd wanted nothing more than to live quietly with his unusual companion, but now he'd been thrust into a public dispute he never wanted. Copper pressed against his leg, solid and warm, and Harlan reached down to touch that reddish-grey fur. The animal's presence steadied him, even as questions multiplied in his mind. What was Caro really after? How had he produced paperwork for an animal he'd never seen? What exactly was this timber mix breeding program? One thing Harlan knew with bone-deep certainty: Copper wasn't going anywhere. Whatever game Caro was playing, whatever strings he could pull with his money and connections, Harlan would fight it. He'd lost Martha, lost his connection to the world, but he wouldn't lose this, not without a fight. The morning sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the porch where moments ago the confrontation had played out. Harlan could feel the weight of what was coming. Legal battles, public scrutiny, the full force of Caro's influence bearing down on him. But as Copper's steady presence remained at his side, Harlan knew he'd made the right choice. Sometimes, standing your ground was the only option, no matter the cost. The morning after Caro's visit, Harlan sat at his kitchen table, staring at his coffee gone cold. Copper lay at his feet, head on paws, those amber eyes watching him with uncanny understanding. The threat of legal action and the county's deadline hung over them like storm clouds. Harlan knew he needed help, real help, not the kind that came with strings attached like Caro's checkbook. He'd heard about the Wildlife Service office in town, though he'd never had reason to visit before. Maybe they could shed some light on Copper's unusual behavior. "Come on, boy," he said, rising from the table. "Let's see if we can get some answers." The Wildlife Service office sat in a modest building on the outskirts of town, surrounded by native plants and educational displays. Inside, the walls were covered with maps and wildlife posters. A woman in mud-stained boots looked up from her computer as they entered. "Can I help you?" she asked, then noticed Copper. Her expression shifted from polite interest to focused attention. "Name's Harlan Pike," he said. "I need some advice about." He gestured to Copper, who was already investigating the room with his characteristic silent intensity. "I'm Rowan Hale," she said, standing. Her handshake was firm, practical. "Field biologist. That's quite an interesting animal you've got there." There was something in her tone, not the condescension he'd gotten from the county officials or Caro's slick certainty, that made Harlan relax. Slightly. She watched Copper with trained eyes as he moved around the room, noting details. "Mind if I observe him for a minute?" she asked. Harlan nodded, and they both watched as Copper explored. The animal moved with fluid grace, stopping occasionally to scent roll against certain spots. A behavior Harlan had noticed but never understood. "How long have you had him?" Rowan asked, taking notes. "Found him during that big storm a few weeks back, in a culvert, half drowned." Harlan explained the rescue, Copper's odd behaviors, and finally, Caro's claim. Rowan listened intently, her face growing more serious. "I'd like to check something if you're willing," she said after he finished. "We can do it right here. Keep it unofficial. I have a scanner that might tell us more." "Scanner? For microchips or ear tags?" "Most wild animals we track have some form of identification." She paused. "Given what you've described about his behavior, I have a theory I'd like to check." Harlan hesitated, then nodded. "Copper, come here, boy." The animal came willingly, trusting Harlan's calm tone. Rowan approached slowly, scanner in hand. As she moved closer, she noticed something beneath the mud dried on Copper's ear. "There's a mark here," she said softly. "May I?" With gentle fingers, she cleaned away the dried mud, revealing a scar, not natural, but deliberately made. A code had been burned into the skin. Y12. The scanner in her hand pinged, confirming what the scar suggested. Rowan's expression changed dramatically, alarm replacing professional curiosity. "Mr. Pike," she said carefully, "I need you to hear me out completely before you react. Can you do that?" Harlan felt his stomach tighten. "Just tell me straight." "Your Copper isn't a dog at all," she said, meeting his eyes. "This code, Y12, it's from our Red Wolf recovery program. He's a pure Red Wolf pup, probably taken from his den during that storm. They're critically endangered, protected by federal law." The room seemed to tilt slightly. Harlan looked down at Copper, at Y12, seeing him with new eyes. The silent ways, the wild grace, the intelligence that had always seemed beyond domestic. It all made terrible sense. "That's why Caro has those papers," he said slowly. "He's covering something up." Rowan nodded grimly. "We've suspected there's been tampering with the recovery program, but haven't been able to prove anything. Some pups have gone missing, only to have reports surface later about timber wolf hybrids being bred and sold. If Caro's involved." "What happens now?" Harlan asked, his hand finding Copper's fur automatically. "Legally, He should be returned to the program immediately, Rowan said. But if Caro's connected to the disappearances, rushing this could spook him and his whole operation. We need to be smart about this. She looked thoughtful for a moment. Would you be willing to work with me on this? Keep him safe while we gather evidence. Harlan looked down at the animal he'd pulled from the flood, the one who'd brought him back to living instead of just existing. Wolf or dog, it didn't matter. He'd already made his choice that first night. Tell me what you need, he said. Rowan's relief was visible. First, we document everything. That code is proof he's one of ours. Then we start building a case, carefully. Caro won't expect us to know what we know. As they began making plans, Copper, Y12, watched them with those knowing amber eyes. He was still the same creature Harlan had rescued, still the silent companion who'd changed his life. But now he was something more. Living proof of a crime, a key to something larger than either of them had imagined. The weight of responsibility settled deeper on Harlan's shoulders, but it felt right. Sometimes the path you're meant to walk finds you, even when you're not looking for it. He'd started by saving a drowning pup. Now he had the chance to help save something even bigger, if they could pull it off. Rowan sat down at Harlan's kitchen table, her notebook open before her. Copper settled at Harlan's feet, seemingly at ease despite the tension in the room. The afternoon light filtered through the windows, casting long shadows across the worn linoleum floor. I need to explain everything, Rowan began, her voice steady but grave. What I'm about to tell you goes beyond just Copper's identity. There's a bigger picture here, and it's not pretty. Harlan pulled out a chair, the legs scraping against the floor. Go on. That tag we found, Y12, it's from one of our protected red wolf dens. We monitor several family groups in this region as part of the recovery program. She flipped through her notes. Back in March, when those big storms hit, we lost track of several pups. We thought they'd died in the flooding, but now, she gestured to Copper, you're saying someone took them? Harlan's voice was tight. Poachers. Rowan's face hardened. They watch our movements, wait for opportunities like the storms. They grab pups young enough to handle before they're too wild. She paused, watching Copper. They're worth a lot of money to the right buyers. Harlan's hands clenched into fists on the table. And Caro? We've suspected his operation for months. He claims to breed special timber wolf hybrids, but the timing of his new litters always coincides with missing pups from our program. She pulled out several photographs, laying them on the table. These are legitimate red wolves from our program. Look familiar. Harlan studied the images. The resemblance to Copper was unmistakable. The same lean build, the distinctive reddish-grey fur, those amber eyes that seemed to hold ancient wisdom. He's laundering them, Rowan continued, taking wild wolves and passing them off as specially bred dogs. But it gets worse. Adult wolves sometimes track their stolen pups, following their scent, when they get too close to Caro's property. He kills them, Harlan finished, his voice hollow. Rowan nodded grimly. We've found bodies, but could never prove the connection. He's careful, well connected. The local authorities don't want to touch him. Harlan looked down at Copper. No, Y12. Feeling the world shift beneath him. The quiet companion he'd nursed back to health wasn't just some strange dog. He was a wild creature, born to run free, part of a species fighting for survival. What happens now? He asked, though he already knew the answer. Legally, there's no grey area here. Private citizens can't keep red wolves. They're critically endangered, protected by federal law. He needs to be returned to the program. Rowan's voice was gentle, but firm. Harlan felt the truth of it sink into his bones. He'd known somehow from the beginning that Copper was different. Those silent ways, that wild grace, they weren't oddities to be trained out. They were the very essence of what he was. I won't fight it, he said quietly. But Caro is smart and dangerous, Rowan finished. If we move too quickly, he'll destroy evidence and probably hurt more wolves in the process. We need to be strategic. She leaned forward, her expression intense. I'm asking for your help, Mr. Pike. We can use this situation to finally expose his operation. but it'll take time and careful planning. Are you willing to work with me on this?" Harlan looked at the wolf at his feet, remembering that stormy night when he'd first heard that thin cry from the culvert. He'd acted then without thinking, simply knowing something needed his help. Now he faced another choice, but this time with full understanding of the consequences. "What do you need me to do?" Relief flooded Rowan's face. "For now, keep Copper, Y-12, safe and act normal. We'll document everything, the ear tag, any interactions with Caro, everything that's happened since you found him. We'll build our case carefully, make it bulletproof." She pulled out more papers, spreading them across the table. "These are reports of similar cases, patterns we've noticed. With your testimony and Copper as evidence, we might finally have enough to shut Caro down." They spent the next hour planning, mapping out careful steps forward. Rowan explained the legal procedures they'd need to follow, the evidence they'd have to gather, the potential risks. Through it all, Copper watched them with those knowing eyes, as if he understood the weight of what was being decided. "It won't be easy," Rowan warned as she gathered her things to leave. "Caro won't give up without a fight." "I didn't expect easy," Harlan replied. "I just want to do what's right," as he walked her to her truck. The afternoon sun was sinking toward the tree line. Copper followed them, his movements fluid and wild in a way Harlan now fully understood. This wasn't just about one wolf anymore. It was about all of them. The ones in the woods, the ones in Caro's kennels, the ones who hadn't survived his greed. Harlan had lived a quiet life since losing his wife, keeping to himself, avoiding complications. But sometimes life handed you something bigger than yourself, something that demanded you step up and take a stand. He watched Rowan's truck disappear down the drive, then looked down at the wolf beside him. "Guess we've got work to do," he said softly. Copper, Y-12, pressed against his leg, a gesture of trust that meant more now than ever before. Together they walked back to the house, each step taking them further down a path neither had expected, but both now knew they had to travel. In the soft glow of Harlan's kitchen light, 4 people gathered around a spread of worn maps on the wooden table. Deputy Clay Rourke stood with his arms crossed, his weathered uniform a stark contrast to his determined expression. Beside him, retired game warden Tom Fletcher traced gnarled fingers along the creased paper, his eyes sharp despite his 70 years in the field. "These logging trails," Harlan said, pointing to the faded lines he knew by heart. "They all lead back to Caro's property. Most folks don't even know they exist anymore." Rowan leaned in, her notebook already filling with observations. "Perfect for moving animals without being seen. What about surveillance points?" Fletcher tapped a spot where 3 trails converged. "There's an old hunter's blind here, been abandoned for years, but the elevation's good. You can see clear to Caro's back pasture." Deputy Rourke nodded slowly. "I can run extra patrols, keep it official, looking. Already got dashcam footage of some suspicious vehicles heading that way at odd hours." "We need to be careful," Rowan cautioned. "Caro's got friends in high places. One wrong move and he'll shut everything down." From his spot by the wood stove, Copper watched them with attentive eyes. Harlan had taken to keeping him inside more, especially during daylight hours. The risk of someone spotting him was too great now that they knew what he was. "What about trail cameras?" Fletcher suggested. "I've still got some good ones from my warden days. Night vision, motion, triggered." Rowan's face brightened. "That would be perfect. We need solid evidence. Faces, license plates, anything that shows a pattern." They spent the next hour marking potential camera locations, planning patrol schedules, and establishing secure ways to communicate. Deputy Rourke would be their official cover, making everything look like routine law enforcement activity. Fletcher knew every hidden approach to Caro's land, paths that even the locals had forgotten. "We'll need DNA evidence too," Rowan explained, pulling sample collection kits from her bag. "Hair, scat, anything that proves he's got actual wolves, not just dogs." Harlan absorbed it all, feeling both overwhelmed and oddly energized. After years of keeping to himself, he was part of something bigger, something that mattered. The next few weeks fell into a careful rhythm. During daylight hours, Harlan kept up his normal routine at the repair shop, fixing engines and deflecting questions about his dog. But nights belonged to their mission. He and Fletcher set up the trail cameras under cover of darkness, choosing spots where the paths narrowed and vehicles would have to slow down. Rowan taught them proper evidence collection techniques, wearing gloves, careful documentation, maintaining the chain of custody. Deputy Rourke's presence proved invaluable. His official vehicle deterred suspicious behavior when needed, and his dashcam captured a steady stream of late-night traffic to and from Caro's property. More importantly, he knew how to build a legal case that would stand up in court. "We're not just collecting evidence," he explained one evening. "We're building a story that a jury can follow. Every piece has to connect." Copper adapted to their new schedule, seeming to understand the need for caution. He stayed close to the house during the day, only venturing out with Harlan after sunset. On their night walks, his wild heritage showed clearly: the way he moved through shadows, how he froze at the slightest unusual sound. The first real breakthrough came 3 weeks into their surveillance. Fletcher's trail cameras caught a series of images that made their careful planning worth it. The timestamps showed a pattern: trucks arriving between 2 and 3 in the morning, staying for exactly 47 minutes, then leaving with covered cages in their beds. "Look at how they move," Rowan pointed out, spreading the photos across Harlan's kitchen table. "These aren't amateurs. They know exactly what they're doing." The images showed men working with practiced efficiency, using hand signals instead of lights, their movements suggesting long experience. In one particularly clear shot, a cage cover had slipped, revealing the distinctive shape of a wolf's head. "This is good," Deputy Rourke said, studying the license plates visible in several frames. "I can run these, start building connections." Fletcher's DNA collection efforts were paying off too. Hair samples caught in their collection stations matched the genetic profile of red wolves. Scat analysis confirmed the presence of multiple individuals. "We're getting there," Rowan said one evening, reviewing their growing pile of evidence. "But we need to be patient. One solid case is better than 10 weak ones." Harlan understood the need for patience, but it wasn't easy. Every night, watching Copper move through the darkness with his natural grace reminded him of other wolves trapped in Caro's operation. The evidence they were gathering wasn't just about laws broken. It was about lives stolen. Their careful documentation began painting a clear picture. Regular deliveries, consistent patterns of movement, genetic proof of wild wolves. Each piece added strength to their case, building towards something that even Caro's connections couldn't easily dismiss. "We're doing this right," Deputy Rourke assured them during one late-night meeting. "By the book, every step documented. When we move, he won't have anywhere to hide." Rowan's expertise guided their evidence collection, ensuring everything would stand up to legal scrutiny. Fletcher's decades of field experience helped them stay one step ahead of Caro's security measures. And through it all, Deputy Rourke's official presence kept their activities looking legitimate. The team developed a quiet efficiency, each person playing their role. They communicated through secure channels, shared information carefully, and maintained their normal routines to avoid suspicion. Hope grew stronger with each new piece of evidence, each confirmed pattern, each documented violation. One night, reviewing their progress, Harlan realized how much had changed since that stormy evening when he'd first found Copper. He'd gone from a man who kept to himself to part of a dedicated team, working to right a wrong bigger than any of them. The wolf they called Copper lay at his feet, dozing but alert, a living reminder of why their work mattered. In the soft lamplight, Harlan could see both what he was, a wild creature meant for freedom, and what he represented, the chance to protect something precious, to stand up for what was right. Their evidence was building, their case growing stronger. Each careful step brought them closer to exposing Caro's operation. The path ahead wasn't easy, but they weren't walking it alone. The morning sun hadn't yet burned through the fog when Harlan heard vehicles crunching up his gravel driveway. Through the kitchen window, he spotted 3 county trucks and Mort Caro's gleaming black pickup pulling in. His heart dropped into his stomach. Copper, lounging by the wood stove, lifted his head and let out a low whine. Harlan moved quickly, opening the back door. "Go on, boy," he whispered. "Like we practiced." The wolf dog slipped silently into the morning mist, heading for their prearranged hiding spot in the dense undergrowth behind the shop. A sharp knock rattled the screen door. "Mr. Pike? County Animal Control. We have a court order to inspect the premises." Harlan opened the door to find two uniformed officers flanked by a suited woman clutching a clipboard. Behind them, Mort Caro leaned against his truck, arms crossed, wearing a satisfied smirk that made Harlan's blood boil. "May I see that order?" Harlan asked, keeping his voice steady despite the anger churning in his gut. The woman handed over several official-looking papers. Harlan's eyes caught phrases that made his chest tighten. "Dangerous animal. Unfit conditions. Immediate seizure, if warranted." They'd painted him as some backwoods menace keeping a vicious beast. "Where's the animal in question?" one of the officers asked, peering past Harlan into the house. "He's out running the property," Harlan replied truthfully. "Got about 5 acres here." The woman with the clipboard frowned. "You let a potentially dangerous dog run loose?" "Never had any complaints from neighbors," Harlan said. "Never had any incidents." "That's not what we heard about the school bus stop," she countered, making notes. "You mean when he scared off a coyote that was getting too close to kids?" Harlan felt his face growing hot. Seems like protecting children should count in his favor. The inspection team spread out across his property. They photographed his house, his shop, the kennel he'd built for Copper. They measured fence heights and noted gate latches. They rifled through his trash, looking for evidence of improper feeding or care. From the road, Caro watched it all with poorly concealed glee. The man was putting on a show of concerned citizenship, but his eyes gleamed with predatory satisfaction. A familiar patrol car pulled up, and Deputy Clay Rourke stepped out. He nodded to Harlan, then approached the inspection team with an air of casual interest. "Morning, folks. Thought I'd stop by, seeing as I'm familiar with this situation." Harlan caught the deputy's subtle head shake, a warning not to say too much. The inspection team huddled with Rourke, reviewing their findings. Harlan couldn't hear their conversation, but he saw Rourke's steady, reasonable gestures, the way he kept directing their attention to his own documentation of Copper's good behavior. When the team finally loaded back into their vehicles, the clipboard woman approached Harlan. "We'll be filing our report today. Given the concerns raised, you should expect further action within 72 hours. As the county vehicles pulled away, Deputy Rourke lingered. He waited until Caro's truck disappeared around the bend before speaking. "They're pushing for a seizure order. Got a judge lined up to sign it tomorrow morning." Harlan's throat went dry. "How long?" 24 hours, maybe less." Rourke glanced toward the woods where Copper had vanished. "Whatever you and Rowan have been working on, might want to speed it up." Harlan was already pulling out his phone. Rowan answered on the first ring. "They're making their move," he said without preamble. "We need to get everything ready now." "I'll call the lab," she replied, her voice tense but focused. "Meet me at the office in 30 minutes. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Rowan's small office at the Wildlife Service Station became their command center. They spread their evidence across her desk. DNA test results, surveillance photos, tracking data, witness statements. Fletcher arrived with his trail cam footage, and Deputy Rourke brought his dashcam recordings. "Look at these patterns," Rowan said, arranging photos chronologically. "Same trucks, same times, same routes. And here," she pointed to lab results, "genetic markers that prove these aren't just wolf-dog hybrids. These are pure red wolves." "It's solid," Rourke agreed, "but Caro's got friends in high places. We need something that'll shock them into action before that seizure order comes through." A sharp knock made them all jump. Rowan's colleague stuck his head in. "There's someone from the county asking about your wolf DNA submissions. Says they need to verify chain of custody." Rowan's face hardened. "They're trying to discredit our evidence before we can use it." "He's getting desperate," Fletcher observed. "Means we're close to something he really doesn't want us to find." They worked through lunch, consolidating their findings into a clear, compelling case. Rourke made calls to trusted contacts in the state wildlife agency. Rowan prepared emergency petitions for federal intervention, citing the Endangered Species Act. Late in the afternoon, Harlan's phone buzzed with a text from his neighbor. "Strange truck parked near your back field. Been there an hour." He showed the message to Rourke, who immediately straightened. "He won't wait for the legal system if he thinks he's about to lose everything. You need to get back there." "I'll come with you," Rowan said, already gathering her gear. "We've got enough here to start the official wheels turning. Fletcher can handle the lab submissions." The drive back to Harlan's place seemed to take forever, though they pushed the speed limit the whole way. The strange truck was gone when they arrived, but something felt off. Copper didn't come when Harlan called, which wasn't like him. They found fresh tire tracks leading to the back of the property, along with boot prints in the soft earth. Harlan's hands clenched into fists. "He's trying to steal him before we can prove what he is. We won't let that happen," Rowan said firmly. She pulled out her phone and started documenting the tracks. "This is just more evidence. And now we know for sure. He's planning something illegal." They spent the next hour setting up additional cameras and motion sensors around the property. Rowan showed Harlan how to use a new secure messaging app to alert their whole team instantly if anything happened. As dusk approached, they finally spotted Copper slinking back through the trees. He was unharmed but agitated, his amber eyes scanning constantly, his movements more wolf-like than ever. "He knew they were here," Rowan observed. "He's smarter than Caro gives him credit for." Harlan knelt beside his companion, feeling the tension in the animal's muscles. "We're running out of time, aren't we?" "Yes," Rowan admitted. "But we're not running away. Everything we've gathered, every piece of evidence, it all points to something bigger than just one wolf. When this breaks open, it's going to expose his whole operation." The setting sun cast long shadows across the yard as they finished their preparations. They couldn't know exactly what Caro would try next, but they could be ready. The evidence was solid, their team was in place, and the truth was on their side. But watching Copper pace restlessly by the wood stove that evening, Harlan knew the hardest part was still to come. The next 24 hours would determine not just Copper's fate, but the future of every wolf in Caro's corrupt operation. The thought should have terrified him, but instead, he felt a calm determination. He wasn't alone anymore, and he wasn't fighting just for himself. The night pressed heavy against Harlan's windows. He dozed fitfully in his armchair, one hand resting on the rifle across his lap. Copper lay curled by the wood stove, his amber eyes reflecting the dying embers. The old house creaked and settled around them. Familiar sounds that had become warning signals in the tense atmosphere. A branch scraped against the tin roof. Harlan's eyes snapped open, his shoulders tight. The clock on the wall showed 2:15 in the morning. Everything seemed quiet. Too quiet. The usual chorus of spring peepers had gone silent. Copper's head lifted suddenly, his ears pricking forward. Before Harlan could react, a soft pop came from outside, followed by a whistling sound. Something small broke through the window screen, landing with a metallic clank on the floor. A thick, sweet-smelling smoke began to fill the room. "No," Harlan lunged forward, but his movements felt sluggish. Copper was already stumbling, trying to get to his feet. Through blurring vision, Harlan saw shadows moving outside. The screen door ripped open with a screech of torn metal. He tried to raise the rifle, but his arms wouldn't cooperate. The smoke filled his lungs, making him cough. Dark figures in masks moved through the haze. One of them scooped up Copper's limp form, while another kicked the rifle from Harlan's weakening grip. "Quick and clean," a muffled voice ordered. "Leave no trace." Harlan fought against the drug's effects, trying to stand. His legs betrayed him, and he crashed to his knees. Through the fog in his mind, he recognized the expensive boots walking past Caro's boots. The last thing he saw was Copper's tail disappearing through the doorway. When consciousness returned, the house was empty. Dawn's grey light filtered through the broken window. Harlan's head pounded as he staggered to his feet, his throat raw from the gas. He fumbled for his phone with shaking hands, hitting Rowan's number. "They took him," he rasped. "Caro's men, they used some kind of gas." "I'm on my way," Rowan said immediately. "Call Rourke. I'll alert the team." Harlan was examining the tire tracks in his yard when his phone buzzed again. "Unknown number," he answered warily. "Listen close," a frightened voice whispered. "I work for Caro. They took your wolf to the old Jessup tobacco barn, the one off Route 12. But something's wrong. Caro's lost it. He's talking about burning everything, starting fresh somewhere else. You need to. The line went dead. Rowan's truck roared up the drive just as Harlan finished calling Deputy Rourke. She jumped out, equipment bag in hand, face grim with determination. Jessup Barn, Harlan said, already moving toward his truck. Anonymous tip. Caro's going to torch it. I know the place, Rowan replied, throwing her gear in the back. It's been a handoff spot for illegal wildlife trade for years, but we could never prove it. Rourke coming? 10 minutes behind us. Fletcher too. They peeled out onto the road, gravel spraying. Harlan's winch rattled against the truck bed as they pushed well past the speed limit. Every second felt like an eternity. The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten, painting the clouds in 6 shades of yellow and grey. There, Rowan pointed suddenly. On the horizon, an orange glow pulsed against the dawn. Smoke rose in a thick column, black against the pale sky. Harlan's hands tightened on the wheel. They were still at least 2 miles out, taking the back roads to approach from the least obvious direction. The flames grew larger with each passing minute, painting the clouds with hellish light. Fletcher's battered pickup was waiting at the property line, hidden in a stand of sweet gum trees. The old game warden had his rifle ready and maps spread across his hood. Caro's got at least 3 vehicles on site, he reported as they pulled up. Barn's fully involved on the south end, but the north side's still standing. There's a loading dock on that end, probably where they're keeping any animals. A high, keening sound cut through the roar of the flames, a sound like metal being torn, but organic, alive. Copper's voice. Harlan started forward, but Rowan caught his arm. Wait, she said. We do this smart or we all die in there. Fletcher, cover the road. Any of Caro's men try to run. Get plates. And faces. Rourke's 2 minutes out, he'll block the main entrance. Harlan, get your winch cable ready. We might need to pull down some walls. The heat hit them like a wall as they approached the burning barn. The ancient timbers groaned, decades of tobacco dust feeding the flames. Through gaps in the weathered boards, they could see moving shadows and the gleam of metal cages. Another keen split the air, closer now, desperate, dying. Harlan broke into a run, Rowan right behind him. The north loading dock stood partially sheltered from the flames, but smoke poured through every crack. As they reached the door, they heard engines starting. Caro's men making their escape as the evidence burned. The door was chained, but the old wood around the hasp was dry and rotten. One hard kick splintered it apart. Smoke billowed out, along with the unmistakable sounds of frightened animals. "Copper!" Harlan shouted into the inferno. "Where are you, boy?" A familiar whine answered from the darkness beyond the flames. Metal, clear above the fire's roar. Somewhere in that burning hell, a red wolf waited for rescue. And Harlan Pike was done letting other people decide who lived and who died. Deputy Clay Rourke's cruiser came sliding around the curve, lights flashing in the pre-dawn gloom. He positioned his vehicle at an angle that gave his dashcam a clear view of the burning barn's northern face. The camera's red recording light blinked steadily, documenting everything. "Got you covered," he called out, drawing his service weapon. "Fire department's 10 minutes out." The smoke was getting thicker, pouring from every gap in the old boards. Harlan could barely see through the stinging haze as he worked to hook the winch cable to the corner post. His hands shook as he looped the heavy steel line, but his movements were sure. Years of logging had taught him exactly how much force it would take to bring down this wall. A sharp crack split the air. Not wood this time, but a rifle. Shot. The bullet kicked up splinters near Harlan's feet. "That's far enough." Mort Caro emerged from the shadows, a hunting rifle braced against his shoulder. His expensive boots were soaked with diesel fuel, leaving dark prints on the dirt. "Back away from my property. Your property's on fire," Rowan shouted, keeping low. "There are animals dying in there." Caro's laugh was ugly. "Fire solves problems, cleans up loose ends. By sunrise, there won't be any evidence left, just some unfortunate strays that got trapped when vandals torched my barn." The heat was becoming unbearable. Harlan and Rowan dropped to their stomachs, where the air was marginally clearer. The ground itself seemed to radiate warmth, and every breath felt like swallowing broken glass. "Hook it up!" Rowan coughed, her eyes streaming. "I'll get Copper." Harlan nodded, army, crawling the last few feet to secure the winch cable. His shirt was soaked with sweat, and ash rained down like grey snow. Above them, the ancient timbers groaned ominously. "You people don't understand what you're messing with," Caro called out, taking another step forward. His boots splashed in the puddles of diesel. "You think this is about some mutt? Real wolves, pure red wolves, that's where the money is. Rich folks'll pay anything for a piece of wild in their backyard. And if some breeding stock goes missing from government programs, well, storms happen, don't they?" Deputy Rourke's voice cut through the crackle of flames. "Keep talking, Mort." Cameras getting every word. Caro's head snapped toward the cruiser, his face twisting as he noticed the blinking red light. In that moment of distraction, Harlan lunged for his truck's controls. The winch whined to life, cable going taut. Wood screamed as the corner post began to give way. With a thunderous crack, an entire section of the barn's wall peeled outward and collapsed. Rowan was moving before the dust settled. She scrambled through the gap on her hands and knees, disappearing into the inferno. Harlan's heart stopped as he lost sight of her in the smoke. Endless seconds ticked by. The fire roared louder, feeding on fresh oxygen from the breach. Then came a sound that cut through everything else, Copper's high, desperate whine, followed by Rowan's voice. "Got him! He's tied up getting the cables now!" Harlan could just make out her shape through the smoke, working frantically with a pocket knife. The building shuddered, raining burning debris. A support beam crashed down barely 10 feet away, sending up a fountain of sparks. "Rowan!" Harlan shouted. "Get out of there!" Almost. Her voice was barely audible over the fire's roar. "Got it! Copper, go! Go!" A grey shape burst through the smoke, trailing cut cable ties. Copper bolted straight for Harlan, his fur singed but his eyes wild and alive. Rowan emerged right behind him, crawling on her elbows, choking on the toxic air. "Don't move!" Caro had recovered his aim, swinging the rifle between them. "Nobody's taking my—" His words cut off in a yelp as his diesel-soaked boots slipped on the wet ground. The rifle went flying as he crashed down hard. Deputy Rourke was on him in an instant, cuffs coming out. "Mort Caro!" The deputy's voice was clear and steady, perfect for the dashcam's microphone. "You're under arrest for animal trafficking, attempted murder, arson, and whatever else we find once we dig through this mess. You have the right to remain silent." Harlan barely heard the rest of the Miranda rights. He was too busy checking Copper and Rowan for injuries as the first fire trucks wailed in the distance. His wolf pup pressed against his leg, trembling but unharmed. Rowan sat up slowly, coughing out smoke but managing a tired smile. "Well," she rasped, "I think we got our evidence." Behind them, the barn continued to burn, but its secrets were already free. Deputy Rourke led a cursing Caro to his cruiser, the dashcam's red light still, blinking steadily. The eastern sky was beginning to lighten, smoke and dawn painting the clouds in shifting shades of grey and gold. The wail of sirens split the heavy night air. Red and blue lights strobed through the smoke, casting eerie shadows across the scorched ground. 3 fire trucks rumbled up the dirt road, followed by additional patrol cars and an ambulance. Deputy Rourke kept his grip firm on Caro's arm while carefully collecting the dropped rifle with his free hand. "This'll be going into evidence," he said, his voice carrying the weight of years of law enforcement experience. The weapon disappeared into an evidence bag, properly tagged and documented. Firefighters jumped into action, unreeling heavy hoses and shouting coordinates. Water arced through the air, hitting the burning barn with precision. Steam hissed skyward as the flames began to retreat, revealing the blackened skeleton of the structure. Rowan knelt beside Copper, her movements gentle but purposeful. She pulled a first aid kit from her truck and began examining him for injuries. The wolf pup's fur was singed in places, and his paws showed minor burns from the hot ground, but his eyes were alert and tracking everything around him. "Hold still, buddy," she murmured, applying burn cream to his pads. "You're going to be just fine." Copper, showing remarkable trust, remained still under her careful ministrations. His amber eyes kept darting to Harlan, seeking reassurance. Harlan stood a few yards away, his hands trembling as the adrenaline began to ebb. The reality of what they'd just survived was hitting him in waves. The barn could have become their tomb. If they'd arrived minutes later, if the deputy hadn't been recording, if the winch cable had snapped. He shook his head, trying to clear the parade of terrible possibilities. "Mr. Pike?" A paramedic approached, oxygen tank in hand. "We need to check you for smoke inhalation." He wanted to wave them off, but Rowan caught his eye and nodded firmly. "Let them help, Harlan. We all breathed in too much of that smoke." The next hour unfolded in organized chaos. Firefighters methodically extinguished hotspots, while evidence technicians photographed everything. The deputy's dashcam footage was downloaded and secured. Caro's recorded confession safely preserved. More officers arrived with search warrants, fanning out across Caro's property. They found ledgers in his house, documenting sales and shipments. Computer files revealed a network of wealthy buyers, all believing they were purchasing exotic wolf dogs when they were actually trafficking in endangered species. The retired game warden who'd helped them gather evidence arrived, his weathered face grim as he surveyed the scene. "Those trail cam photos we got last week? Found more like them. Shows a pattern going back months. Matches up perfect with missing wolves from 3 different preserves." Harlan sat on the tailgate of his truck, an oxygen mask temporarily set aside, and watched as their careful documentation came together with the night's events to form an airtight case. The DNA samples they'd collected, the surveillance footage, the financial records, all of it aligned to tell the story of Caro's operation. A state wildlife officer approached Rowan, who was still tending to Copper. "We'll need statements from everyone," she said, "but this is solid work. We've been trying to crack this trafficking ring for years." Caro sat in the back of Deputy Rourke's cruiser, his expensive clothes now smeared with soot and dirt. His usual smooth confidence had crumbled into something bitter and small. Through the window they could see him watching as his empire collapsed, one piece of evidence at a time. Emergency vehicles began to depart as the immediate danger passed. The barn was now a smoking ruin, its secrets exposed to the grey pre-dawn light. Teams of investigators moved through the debris, documenting everything. They found more cages in a hidden cellar, thankfully empty. Copper had been the only captive that night. Harlan finally allowed himself to approach Copper and Rowan. The wolf pup's paws were bandaged, but he stood and pressed against Harlan's leg, his familiar weight both grounding and reassuring. For the first time since finding him in that storm-filled culvert, Harlan felt the tightness in his chest begin to ease. "He's going to be okay," Rowan said softly, packing away the first aid supplies. "The burns are minor. He's tough, just like his wild family." The mention of Copper's original pack made Harlan's throat tight. Somewhere in the protected forests they were out there, the family this pup had been stolen from. The thought no longer filled him with dread or possessive fear. Instead, he felt something new, hope. Deputy Rourke walked over, his notebook in hand. "We'll need you both to come in later today to give formal statements. But I wanted you to know, Caro's already asking about a deal. Says he'll give up his contacts if we go easier on him." The deputy's weathered face showed satisfaction. He's running scared. The eastern sky was brightening now, painting the scattered clouds in shades of pink and gold. The smoke had begun to dissipate, carried away by a gentle morning breeze. Harlan looked down at Copper, who gazed back with those intelligent amber eyes. The wolf pup was safe. The evidence was secure. Justice was finally catching up to those who had tried to profit from the wild's most vulnerable creatures. Rowan touched his arm lightly. "You did it, Harlan. You kept him safe until we could expose the truth." "We did it," he corrected, his voice rough with smoke and emotion. "All of us." Around them, the investigation continued. Phones rang as warrants were executed across the county. Evidence bags were carefully labeled and sealed. The first rays of sunrise touched the tops of the pine trees, promising a new day, one where at least this small corner of the pine world was a little safer for creatures like Copper and the family he'd lost. Morning sunlight filtered through the trees as Harlan stood in the Wildlife Service parking lot, watching officials process paperwork that would forever change his life. The forms were spread across the hood of Rowan's truck, Stark white pages filled with legal language that boiled down to one simple truth. Copper couldn't come home with him. Rowan approached with a gentle expression, holding another stack of documents. "I know this is hard," she said, her voice soft but firm. "But you're doing the right thing. As a protected red wolf, Copper needs to be in a managed environment before we can prepare him for release." Harlan nodded, his throat tight. He'd known this was coming since the moment they'd discovered Copper's true identity, but knowing didn't make it easier. "What happens now?" "We have a specialized holding facility about 40 miles from here," Rowan explained, spreading out a map marked with careful notations. "It's designed for minimal human contact, helping wolves maintain their wild instincts while we monitor their health and behavior. Once Copper shows he's ready, we'll move him to a soft-release site within the protected territory." The morning stretched on as they worked through the requirements. Veterinarians performed thorough health checks, documenting every detail of Copper's condition. Wildlife officers took photographs and measurements, updating his file with current data. Through it all, Copper remained calm, as if sensing the importance of these moments. "There's something else," Rowan said, hesitating slightly. "We've arranged for you to have some time with him before transport. It's not standard protocol, but given everything you've done to protect him and help expose Caro's operation, well, we felt it was appropriate." Harlan's chest tightened with unexpected gratitude. "Thank you," he managed. They led him to a holding pen designed to minimize stress on the animals. The mesh walls allowed clear sightlines while maintaining necessary separation. Copper was already inside, his reddish-gray fur catching the midday light. "Take as much time as you need," Rowan said quietly, stepping back to give them privacy. Harlan knelt by the mesh, pressing his palms against it. Copper approached without hesitation, pressing close to the barrier. Those familiar amber eyes held the same trust they'd shown since that first stormy night. "Hey, buddy," Harlan whispered, his voice rough. "You did good. Real good." The wolf pup, and it still amazed Harlan to think of him that way, tilted his head, studying Harlan with that peculiar intelligence that had always set him apart. How had Harlan ever thought he was just an unusual dog? Everything about him spoke of wildness, the way he moved, the quiet watchfulness, the innate dignity that no amount of domestication could touch. "You're going home," Harlan continued, watching Copper's ears prick forward at his voice. "Not to my place, to your real home, where you can run free with others like you, where you belong." Copper pressed closer to the mesh, and Harlan could feel the warmth of his body through the barrier. All those nights by the wood stove, those early morning walks, those moments of quiet companionship, they'd been borrowed time, a temporary shelter on Copper's journey back to his true nature. Rowan approached carefully, holding a clipboard. "Harlan, we need to finish the release forms before transport." He nodded, not taking his eyes off Copper. Just give me one more minute." She retreated respectfully, and Harlan used these last precious moments to memorize everything about the wolf pup who had changed his life. The exact pattern of his fur, the alert set of his ears, the way his amber eyes seemed to hold wisdom beyond his years. "I'm gonna miss you something fierce," Harlan admitted quietly. "But this is right. This is what you need." Finally, he stood and turned to Rowan, who waited with the forms. His hand was steady as he signed each page, authorizing Copper's transfer to official custody and eventual release. Each signature felt like both an ending and a beginning. The transport team arrived as dusk approached, their movements efficient but gentle. They loaded Copper into a specialized carrier, designed to minimize stress during the journey. Harlan watched from a distance, knowing that closer contact now would only make things harder. The sun was setting as they drove away, following carefully planned routes to the protected release site. Harlan stood in the gathering darkness, feeling the weight of absence and rightness settling around his shoulders. Rowan remained beside him, a quiet presence offering silent support. "Would you like to know when they release him?" she asked after a while. Harlan considered this, then shook his head. "No," he said finally. "Knowing the exact moment might be too much. Just tell me when it's done, when he's free." They watched the last light fade from the sky, painting the clouds in deep purples and blues. Somewhere out there, Copper was being transported to his new beginning. Soon he would disappear into tall grass and managed wilderness, returning to the life he was born to live. The price of doing right was heavy, but Harlan knew he would pay it again without hesitation. Copper's freedom was worth every moment of loss, every ache of missing him. Some things were bigger than personal comfort, like the preservation of something wild and precious in a world that too often tried to cage it. The seasons turned slowly after Copper's release. Summer heat gave way to autumn chill, and winter's frost crept across the Carolina Piedmont. Through it all, the legal machinery ground steadily forward, processing the mountain of evidence against Mort Caro and his trafficking operation. Harlan watched the proceedings from a distance, attending only when required to testify. The courthouse's marble halls felt foreign to him, but he squared his shoulders and told his part of the story clearly and firmly. The prosecutors praised his precise memory and unwavering account. December brought the first round of convictions. Caro's lower-level associates fell like dominoes, trading information for lighter sentences. The prosecution built an intricate map of the operation's scope. Dozens of wolves taken, hundreds of thousands of dollars changed hands, a network spanning 3 states. In January, federal forensic accountants descended on Caro's records. They worked methodically, following money trails through shell companies and offshore accounts. What emerged was staggering. Millions in unreported income, tax evasions spanning a decade, bribes paid to local officials who had looked the other way. Harlan learned the details in pieces. Usually during Rowan's occasional visits to his shop, she'd stop by with coffee and updates, her face growing more satisfied as the case progressed. "They've frozen all his assets," she told him one grey morning, perched on his workbench while he cleaned a carburetor. "Every property, every account they can find." The judge approved using the seized assets to fund Red Wolf conservation efforts. Harlan nodded, carefully placing a tiny spring. "Good use for dirty money. The restitution will help expand protected habitats, improve monitoring systems." She paused, watching him work. "You know, your actions made this possible. Standing up to him that first day, choosing to help us gather evidence. Just did what needed doing," Harlan said quietly, but his weathered face softened slightly at her words. February brought heavy snow and Caro's final court date. The courthouse steps were slick with ice as Harlan climbed them, determined to see this through. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Wildlife officers, conservation groups, even some former employees who'd turned state's evidence. Caro sat at the defense table, his expensive suit, unable to hide how prison had aged him. When the judge entered, the room fell silent. The sentencing was plain and firm. 20 years federal time for trafficking endangered species, plus additional years for tax evasion, attempted murder, and arson. No possibility of early release. As bailiffs led Caro away, his former swagger was gone. He shuffled past Harlan without meeting his eyes. The man who had once threatened and swaggered was reduced to what he truly was, a common criminal who had profited from destroying something precious. Afterward, on the courthouse steps, reporters sought statements from key figures. Harlan slipped away quietly, driving home through the swirling snow. The victory felt important but distant, like thunder rolling away after a storm passes. Life settled into new patterns. Harlan's repair shop stayed busy. Winter was hard on engines, and his reputation for honest work brought steady customers. The silence in his house was different now. No click of claws on hardwood, no warm body curled by the wood stove. But the emptiness felt cleaner somehow, earned rather than simply endured. In early spring, Rowan visited with official news. She found him in his garden, turning soil for the coming season. "Final appeals were denied," she said, accepting the cup of coffee he offered. "Caro's conviction stands. His entire operation has been dismantled." Harlan nodded, looking out across his newly tilled beds. "How are things in the field?" "Better, much better." She smiled. "The trafficking network is broken. Local law enforcement is properly trained now. We've even had some successful den sites this season." They sat in comfortable silence, watching early morning mist rise from the warming earth. Finally, Rowan spoke again, her voice gentle. "Would you like to know about Y12? Harlan's hands tightened briefly on his coffee cup. He'd been careful not to ask about copper directly, knowing that distance was part of the Plush protocol. But now, months later, perhaps it was okay to know. "If you can tell me," he said carefully. "He's doing well. The release was successful. He's integrated with a small pack in the protected area." She paused. "Actually, he's become quite important to the program. His presence has helped stabilize that group's territory." Harlan absorbed this, feeling something tight in his chest ease slightly. He always was good at finding his way. "Yes," Rowan agreed softly. "He was." She left him with a stack of official reports, conviction records, sentencing documents, conservation updates. Harlan read them that evening, sitting in his familiar chair by the wood stove. The legal language was dry, but the meaning was clear. Justice had been served, systems strengthened, wild things better protected. The cost remained. In quiet moments, he still missed Copper's presence fiercely. But that loss was balanced now by purpose, by the knowledge that doing right mattered more than doing easy. His life had expanded beyond his shop's walls, beyond his comfortable solitude. He had chosen to act rather than turn away, and that choice had rippled outward in ways he never expected. Spring advanced steadily, bringing new growth to his garden and fresh wildlife to his woods. Sometimes, in the early morning or late evening, he'd hear distant howls from the protected areas. He never knew if one of those voices belonged to Copper, and he didn't need to know. It was enough that they existed, wild and free, their ancient music carrying across the Carolina night. Spring sunlight warmed the county animal shelter's concrete walkway as Harlan approached. The familiar smell of kibble and disinfectant greeted him as he pushed open the door. Inside, dozens of hopeful eyes followed his movement down the row of kennels. A rangy brown hound caught his attention, not because she looked like Copper, she didn't, but because of her quiet dignity. She sat at the front of her kennel, tail sweeping the floor in gentle welcome. The name card read, "Found on Highway 64. "She's been here 3 months, the shelter worker said. "Good with people, but nobody wants an older dog." The hound's soft brown eyes met his without demand or desperation, just a simple question. "Will you?" "I'll take her," Harlan said. He named her Juniper, after the scraggly trees that dotted his property. She settled into his life with an easy grace, sleeping in Copper's old spot but making it her own. She wasn't a replacement. Nothing could replace what Copper had meant, but she was good company on her own terms. One Saturday morning, Rowan called about checking some reported trap lines. "Could use your knowledge of the old logging roads," she said. Harlan grabbed his gear and whistled for Juniper. They met Rowan at sunrise, Deputy Clay joining them with a thermos of coffee and quiet determination. Together they combed the backwoods, Harlan's memory of long-forgotten trails proving invaluable. They dismantled 3 illegal snares that day alone. It became a regular thing, weekend sweeps with Rowan, mapping and clearing the shadows where poachers worked. Sometimes Clay would come along, his presence a silent endorsement of their mission. Juniper proved herself a natural, her nose leading them to hidden sets that might have been missed. Harlan's world expanded with each expedition. His porch was no longer his boundary. The entire forest became his workshop. Here, with Juniper trotting at his heels and Rowan's steady companionship beside him, he found purpose that went deeper than headlines or temporary victories. This was patient, necessary work, the kind that mattered long after public attention moved elsewhere. Dawn hadn't yet touched the horizon when Harlan parked his truck at the edge of the longleaf pine forest. Juniper stirred in the passenger seat, nose twitching at the crisp morning air. The hound had learned to stay quiet during these early watches, understanding the importance of stillness. Harlan climbed the familiar ridge, his boots crunching softly on pine needles. The first hints of light filtered through the canopy as he settled into position, binoculars ready. Juniper sat patiently beside him, ears perked forward. Movement caught his eye, a flash of reddish-gray fur between the trees. Through the binoculars, Harlan's breath caught. There, moving with fluid grace through the pines, was a red wolf with familiar amber eyes. Copper had grown larger, his frame filled out with the strength of wild living. His coat gleamed with health, and his movements showed the confident wariness of a true wolf. The wolf paused, lifting his nose to test the wind. For a moment, he stood perfectly still, a living embodiment of freedom. Then, like smoke through the trees, he melted back into the dense scrub and disappeared. Harlan lowered the binoculars slowly, his heart full. This wasn't just about saving a puppy anymore. It was about finding his own path, one that had cost him but given back so much more. With Juniper at his side, he started down the trail, ready to face whatever work lay ahead. His life had grown beyond the confines of his porch, beyond his grief, into something larger and more meaningful than he'd ever imagined. Thanks for watching. If any part of this story lingered with you, consider subscribing. I'll be here again tomorrow, sharing another tale that speaks to the soul.